Hi everyone! Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now, let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of green and brown as a vicious spear of agony pierced Lyra's chest. Never had she encountered such torment. A searing, rending force that stole her breath and toppled her to the earth. Her fingers dug into her tunic, a futile attempt to quell the inferno consuming her from the inside. It felt like utter annihilation, her very being pulverized into dust. A raw, animalistic sound tore from her throat, a testament to pure, agonizing suffering. The familiar fragrance of pine and loam, usually a soothing comfort, now felt like a cruel jest. How could the world breathe on unchanged, while her own existence fractured? Through the blurring haze, she saw him, Thorne. He stood sentinel at the wood's edge, a silent observer of her devastation. His face, an unreadable mask, revealed no flicker of empathy. He was close enough that she should feel the familiar tug of their connection, the quiet harmony that always vibrated between them, but instead, a stark, hollow void echoed where their bond had flourished. Her vision swam, and she blinked, struggling to regain focus. Was that remorse shadowing his eyes? Or simply a mirage? A trick played by her fracturing mind? She reached, her hand trembling, a silent entreaty for understanding, for solace, for anything to ease the pain. But he remained immutable, a statue hewn from ice and apathy. "Thorne," she rasped, her voice a threadbare whisper. "What have you done?" He offered no reply, his silence a damning indictment. The pain amplified, cresting into a wave that threatened to shatter her. She felt as though a vital organ was being ripped asunder, leaving a chasm that could never be filled. She crumpled onto the forest floor, her body racked with spasms, her breath shallow and ragged. Around her, the pack began to coalesce, their low murmurs laced with anxiety. They sensed the wrongness, the unnatural severance, the violation of something sacred. Lyra felt their bewilderment, their dread, their desperate scramble to comprehend the incomprehensible. "Lyra!" Lyra shoved through the gathering, her face a study in concern. She knelt beside Lyra, hands hovering, unsure how to offer succor. "What is it? What's wrong?" Lyra was speechless, overwhelmed by the pain that had stolen her voice, her thoughts, her very identity. She yearned to reach Lyra, to find comfort in her presence, but even that simple act felt beyond her grasp. "Thorne!" Lyra's voice sliced through the air, sharp and accusatory. "Do something! What did you do to her?" Thorne stood his ground, his gaze flicking briefly to Lyra before returning to Lyra. A chilling detachment glazed his eyes, an unfamiliar frost that sent a shiver down her spine. "It is finished," he stated, his voice devoid of any inflection. "The bond is broken." A collective intake of breath rippled through the pack. The bond, the bedrock of their society, the sacred tether that bound them, the very essence of their being. To sever it was an act of unthinkable cruelty, a desecration of the most fundamental law. Lyra gaped at Thorne, her expression a mixture of disbelief and horror. You can't. You wouldn't." "Why?" Thorne offered no explanation, simply turning and melting into the shadows of the trees, leading Lyra to her torment, and the pack to confront the catastrophic repercussions of his act. The murmurs escalated, more urgent, more fearful. A tendril of terror began to snake through their ranks, threatening to strangle their unity. If Thorne, their alpha, could shatter the bond, what other atrocities might he commit? What did it portend for their future? Lyra felt herself fading, the pain threatening to consume her entirely. She clung to the edges of consciousness, desperate to remain tethered, but her strength ebbed. The forest began to whirl around her, the sounds of the pack receding into a distant drone. She surrendered to the encroaching darkness, a single thought echoing in her mind. He broke the bondi, but I still feel him. The echo of his presence, the specter of their connection, lingered like the phantom pain of a lost limb, a constant reminder of what had been stolen. Later, under the moon's gaunt skeletal light, Lyra stirred. The sharpest edges of the pain had dulled, leaving a lingering ache and a profound sense of desolation. She sat up slowly, her body protesting with stiffness, her mind grappling with the enormity of what had transpired. The pack had scattered, leaving her alone in the clearing. The air hung heavy with unspoken questions, with fear and uncertainty. She could feel their eyes upon her, watching from the periphery, waiting for her next move. She rose unsteadily, her legs trembling. She looked in the direction of Thorne's departure, her heart throbbing with an agony that surpassed the physical. How could he have done this? How could he have severed the tie that had bound them so completely? She took a hesitant step, then another, her movements measured and deliberate. She didn't know her destination, nor her purpose, only that she couldn't remain mired in this place of pain and betrayal. As she walked, she noticed a peculiar sensation, a subtle tingling in her veins. Faint, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present. The bond was fractured, yes, but something else persisted. A faint resonance, a lingering echo, a stubborn refusal to be completely extinguished. She paused, her heart hammering in her chest. What was it? What still linked her to Thorne after he had dismantled their bond? She closed her eyes, concentrating on the sensation, trying to decipher its meaning. It felt like a gossamer thread, an almost invisible filament stretching between them, defying the magic meant to obliterate it. Then, understanding dawned. It wasn't the bond, per se, that remained. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the love that had blossomed between them, a connection that transcended magic and fate. He might have broken the bond, but he couldn't break their love. It persisted, buried within her heart, a flickering ember that refused to be quenched. And she knew, with unwavering certainty, that it resided within him as well, concealed beneath layers of fear and self-denial. She opened her eyes, fixing her gaze on the distant horizon. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, danger, and pain, but she knew her course. She had to find Thorne. She had to understand the motivations behind his actions. And she had to discover a way to bridge the chasm he had created. Because she knew, with every fiber of her being, that their story wasn't concluded. The bond might be broken, but something profound remained. And whatever it was beckoning her, pulling her toward him, toward a future both terrifying and irresistible. The air grew charged, the mingled scents of ozone and pine intensified. She could feel it now, the disturbance in the very fabric of the forest. A presence, dark and malevolent, was closing in. The whispered danger, the looming threat, had arrived. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that Thorne would need the one thing he had attempted to destroy. Her. Whispers of dark magic Maya's hand, calloused from years of hunting and training, gently stroked Lyra's hair. The scent of lavender and chamomile, a balm Maya brewed herself, filled the small den, a feeble attempt to soothe the raw wound Thorne had ripped open. He used dark magic? Maya's voice was a low rumble, barely audible above the crackling fire. Lyra flinched, the words a fresh wave of pain. "That's what Elder Bram confirmed," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "A ritual, ancient and forbidden, designed to sever a bond completely." Maya's brow furrowed. "But why, Lyra? Why would he do such a thing?" Lyra shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "He wouldn't tell me. He just looked at me with such coldness, like I was a stranger." She pulled away from Maya, wrapping her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the fire. He said he couldn't be what I needed, that he wasn't strong enough." Maya reached for her again, her grip firm and reassuring. "Strong enough? Thorne? He's the strongest alpha we've had in generations." "Fear," Lyra said, the word a bitter taste on her tongue. "I think he was afraid. Afraid of us, of the future." Maya was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the flames. "The whispers have already started," she said finally. "Some are saying he did it to protect the pack, that a weakness in the Alpha could endanger us all." Lyra scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Protect us? By breaking the bond that held us together? By using magic that taints the very land?" The sounds of the pack filtered into the den, muted but present. Lyra could hear snatches of conversations, hushed and anxious. "Did you hear what he did?" A female voice whispered nearby. "Dark magic. It's unheard of, an alpha using such things." Another voice, a male, responded, tinged with fear. "What does this mean for us, for the pack's future?" A third joined in. "He was always so reserved. Maybe this was always inside him." The whispers were like tiny needles pricking at Lyra's skin, each one a reminder of Thorne's betrayal. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise, the pain, the confusion. But then, a different sensation washed over her, faint but undeniable. A pang of longing? Sorrow? It pulsed through her, a ghost of the bond that had once connected her to Thorne. It was like a phantom limb, an ache where warmth and connection used to be. She gasped, clutching at her chest. He's hurting," she breathed, her eyes flying open. Maya frowned. "Lyra, the bond is severed. You shouldn't be able to feel anything." "I know," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "But I do. It's faint, so faint, but it's there. Like a thread that refuses to break." She focused, reaching out with her senses, trying to grasp the elusive feeling. It was clouded, obscured by something dark, a suffocating pressure, like a weight pressing down on him. Fear coiled in her stomach. This wasn't just the pain of a broken bond. This was something more sinister. "He's in danger, Maya," she said, her voice firm despite her inner turmoil. "I don't know what it is, but he needs help." Maya looked at her, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Lyra, you can't. He broke the bond. He doesn't want you." "I don't care," Lyra retorted, rising to her feet. "Something is wrong. I can feel it. And I won't stand by while he destroys himself." She turned towards the entrance of the den, her eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening. "I have to find him." Later, under the cloak of a moonless night, Lyra slipped away from the packlands. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, the usual comforting aromas now tinged with an undercurrent of unease. She followed the faint thread of connection, the lingering echo of Thorne's presence. It led her towards the Shadow Woods, a place whispered about in hushed tones. A place where the trees grew twisted and gnarled, and where the very air seemed to hum with a dark energy. The deeper she ventured into the woods, the stronger the feeling grew, but so did the sense of dread. The trees seemed to watch her, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab her. The ground was uneven and treacherous, littered with fallen branches and decaying leaves. She could hear the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, their eyes glinting in the darkness. But she pressed on, driven by the insistent pull of the fading bond, and the growing certainty that Thorne was in grave danger. As she walked, she recalled a conversation from her childhood. Elder Bram had warned against dabbling in the forbidden arts. Dark magic, he had said, his voice grave, is a seductive mistress. It offers power, but it demands a price. And that price is always too high. She wondered if Thorne had understood that price when he severed their bond. Had he considered the consequences of his actions, not just for her, but for himself? Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a scent that made her stomach churn sulfur and decay. It was the unmistakable stench of dark magic, stronger here than she had ever imagined. The thread connecting her to Thorne pulsed violently, then flickered, almost disappearing. She stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. He was close, but so was whatever darkness had ensnared him. With renewed determination, she quickened her pace, pushing through the tangled undergrowth, the whispers of dark magic swirling subarray around her, urging her to turn back. But she wouldn't. She couldn't. Thorne needed her, whether he knew it or not, and she would find him, even if it meant facing the darkness alone. The cold alpha the wind keened through the shadow woods gaunt, branches, a lament that echoed the hollowness inside Lyra. Against advice, severing ties that should have held, she'd braved this blighted place, compelled by the lingering thread connecting her to Thorne. The air was thick, not only with the reek of rot, but a sharp, foreign tang that set her teeth on edge, a telltale sign of lingering dark magic. Within the Packlands, a different sort of tempest brewed. Barely through her first transformation, Lyra stood quaking before Thorne's solitary cabin, its timbers rough-hewn, the air around it unusually still. She gripped a scrap of parchment, its edges smudged with ink and frantic hope. "Alpha?" she called, her voice a fragile thread against the blustering wind. "I need guidance." Only silence answered. Lyra fidgeted, her eyes flitting nervously, as if expecting ghouls to spring from the shadows. Deprived of her family's territory by a rival pack during the last full moon, she sought Thorne's wisdom, seeking a chance to prove her worth, to belong. But the whispers' tales of Thorne's shift, his chilling demeanor, struck icy fear in her heart. She drew a breath, stepped forward, and rapped timidly on the unyielding wood. "Alpha Thorne?" "It's Lyra." "I.e., it's important." An eternity of silence stretched before the door grudgingly swung inward, revealing Thorne, a figure sculpted from granite, his face a blank canvas, eyes like glacial shards. The vibrant warmth that had once defined him had vanished. "What is it?" he rasped, his voice a flat monotone. Lyra recoiled at the sound, the paper trembling. "Alpha, my home the pack took it. I'm lost. I need your help." His gaze swept over her, dismissive and frigid. Lost territory remains lost. Adapt or perish. I will not coddle weakness. He started to retract into the dimness. "But Alpha," Lyra begged, her voice cracking with desperation. Silence. Thorne barked, a dangerous glint sparking in his eyes. "I have spoken. Do not trouble me again, or suffer the consequences." The door slammed, leaving Lyra exposed to the elements, her aspirations dashed against the stone, the parchment fluttering uselessly. Drawn by the faintest whiff of the Lyra's despair, Lyra arrived as the younger she-wolf fled, tears carving paths down her face. A surge of fury coursed through Lyra, alloyed with profound, aching sorrow. This was an impostor wearing Thorne's features. She strode towards the cabin, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. She had to reach him, decipher the change, breach the fortress he had built around himself. She paused, hand raised to knock. The air around the cabin pulsed with something malignant, raising gooseflesh on her arms. But retreat was impossible. Not when he needed her, even if he was blind to the fact. She inhaled deeply and knocked with resolve. The hush that followed felt even more potent than before, punctuated only by the wind's mournful song through the branches. At last, the door groaned open, exposing Thorne, his expression indecipherable. "Lyra," he stated, his voice a void. "What brings you here?" "I need to know what's happening to you," she declared, her voice trembling slightly but steady. "Why you're pushing us all away. Why you've become this." Thorne's eyes narrowed, a flinty hardness entering his gaze. "I am merely what I must be. Strong, resolved, free." "Free?" Lyra scoffed, a mirthless sound escaping her. "Is that your label? You're not free, Thorne. You're lost. You're drowning in your own terror." "Terror?" Thorne echoed, scorn dripping from each syllable. "I fear nothing." "You fear vulnerability," Lyra challenged, stepping closer, attempting to peer past his defenses. "You fear connection. You fear me. That's why you severed the bond, isn't it? Because you were terrified of our potential, of what we could become." Thorne winced, a flash of agony fleeting across his features, promptly concealed by a mask of apathy. The bond was a liability. It left me open. I am stronger without it. "That's a fabrication," Lyra countered, her voice ringing with truth. "We were always stronger together." "You're not shielding yourself, Thorne. You're only annihilating yourself." "Leave," Thorne commanded, his voice low and lethal. "You have nothing to offer." "I possess everything," Lyra pleaded, reaching to touch his arm. "My love, my fealty, my strength. I have what you need to combat this malevolence consuming you." As if scorched, Thorne jerked away from her touch. "I require nothing from you. Leave me to my solitude, Lyra. Before I commit a deed, we shall both rue." He slammed the door, leaving Lyra isolated, her heart fractured into countless shards. She remained motionless for a long moment, tears streaming, the wind buffeting her. Then she swiped at her eyes, straightened her spine, and pivoted away. She wouldn't abandon him. Not yet. Even if he rejected her, even if he attempted to convince her he needed no one, she knew the truth. And she would discover a means to reach him, to shatter the glacial shell around his soul. Unseen, Thorne watched her departure through a fissure in the cabin wall, his face devoid of expression. Long after she vanished into the forest, he lingered, his gaze fixed on the empty space she had occupied. He turned his gaze to the packlands below. The wolves moved through their routines, hunting, training, caring for the young. He observed Maya tending to Bram's injury, her face creased with worry. He saw Gareth teaching the pups tracking, his laughter drifting through the air. He watched them, but felt no kinship. He was merely an observer, detached, disconnected. He was the Alpha, but he was no longer part of them. He was the cold Alpha, and the gulf between him and his pack widened with each tick of the clock. And as time passed, the darkness within him swelled, threatening to engulf him entirely. Lingering shadows, a strange wind swept through pack territory, a jarring note that prickled fur and raised hackles. It lacked the familiar cadence of gusts through the ancient boughs, the comforting sorceress of leaves. Instead, it was a breath of something deeply wrong, sensed rather than clearly heard. The initial warning went unheeded. Farmer Giles, perpetually adorned with mud-caked boots, reported 3 sheep vanished from their enclosure. No struggle, no sign of forced entry, just an unnerving void where the woolly creatures should have been. Then, Mrs. Hawthorne's prize so disappeared in the dead of night. Rumors began, hushed and fearful, of feral dogs or something far more sinister lurking in the surrounding woods. At the village gathering, Lyra attempted to allay their fears. "We'll intensify the patrols," she declared, her tone resolute despite the gnawing anxiety in her gut. "We will discover the cause." Yet, even as the words left her, a coldness settled upon her, unrelated to the autumnal air. Their fear mirrored in their wide eyes. Next came the shadow play. Not merely the elongated forms of twilight, but something altogether more sinister, more profound, glimpsed at the periphery, vanishing the moment one focused. Young Bran, notorious for his fantastical tales, swore he witnessed a shadow detach from an oak and flow across the forest floor. Old Maggie, weathered by countless winters and not easily frightened, insisted she saw a figure shrouded in darkness, standing guard at the edge of the trees, observing her. Lyra dismissed Bran's account as youthful fancy and attributed Maggie's sighting to tricks of the waning light, but the disquiet lingered, a persistent thrum beneath the veneer of normality. Her patrols grew longer, more frequent. She pushed her physical limits, running until her lungs ached and her muscles protested. She desperately needed to find evidence, something to prove that these were merely isolated incidents, that the pack remained safe. Each venture into the woods, however, only intensified her unease. The forest itself felt altered. The usual vibrant energy, the feeling of intrinsic connection that resonated through her pause, was subdued, bordering on suffocated. The bird song was muted, hesitant trills, as if fearful of disturbing the stillness. Even the scent of the soil seemed weakened, tainted by a metallic undertone she couldn't quite identify. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of bruised violet and sunset crimson, she discovered it, a patch of earth, sterile and desolate, where life refused to take hold. The surrounding flora thrived, lush and green, but this specific area was barren, the ground cold and rigid beneath her touch. A shiver traced its path down her back. It felt wrong. Fundamentally, violently wrong. She began to dig, claws scraping against the resistant earth. Deeper and deeper she burrowed, until her paws were raw and bleeding. Finally, she unearthed something, a fragment of twisted metal, blackened and marred. It thrummed with a faint, frigid energy that set her teeth on edge. Inscribed upon it were symbols radiating malevolence. Lyra recoiled, dropping the artifact as if burned. It struck the earth with a muffled bud, sinking slightly into the lifeless soil. She stared at it, her pulse hammering in her ears. This defied natural explanation. This wasn't the work of wolves or wild dogs. This was something else, something shrouded in a deeper darkness. As she turned to leave, a sound halted her, a twig snapping close by. She spun around, senses heightened, prepared to defend herself. But the forest was empty, only deepening shadows and the whispering breeze. "Who's there?" she called, her tone sharp with strain. Silence met her inquiry. Only the rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, eyes darting from tree to tree. "Show yourself." A low growl, guttural and menacing, answered her. Not the growl of a wolf, but something different, something twisted and unnatural. A chilling fear lanced through her. This was no longer about missing livestock or eerie shadows. This was something far more dangerous, a threat to the very heart of the pack. She fled, paws pounding a frantic rhythm against the forest floor, the image of the infertile patch and the twisted metal seared into her memory. She had to alert the others. They needed to prepare. Back at the pack house, she found Lyra pacing with agitation. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Lyra, thank the moon goddess you've returned," Lyra said, rushing toward her. "Something is happening. I can feel it. The atmosphere is heavy with dread." Lyra nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I know. I found something in the woods. Something dark." She recounted her discovery of the barren earth, the twisted metal, the inhuman growl. Lyra listened, her complexion growing increasingly pallid with each detail. "Dark magic," she breathed when Lyra finished. "That's the sensation, dark magic seeping into our lands." "What can we do?" Lyra asked, her voice barely audible. Lyra shook her head. "I've never encountered anything like this. It's powerful, and its influence is growing." Lyra considered Thorne, isolated and consumed by his inner demons. Could there be a connection? Could he be the source of this encroaching evil? "We must inform him," Lyra said, her voice gaining conviction. "He has to know." Lyra hesitated. "Are you certain? After what transpired—" "I don't care," Lyra interrupted, her voice firm. "This transcends our personal conflicts. We need his assistance." Lyra nodded slowly. "Very well, I will accompany you." Together, they set out toward Thorne's remote dwelling, the shadows lengthening around them, the wind carrying unintelligible whispers. Lyra's heart hammered in her chest, a conflicting blend of fear and resolve. She was uncertain of what awaited them, but they had to confront it together. The pack's survival depended on it, and despite their strained history, a part of her, the part that still remembered their shared bond, hoped that Thorne would stand with them once more. As they neared the cabin, Lyra sensed something amiss. The faint luminescence that usually filtered through the windows was absent. The panes were dark, the door shut tight. An unnatural stillness permeated the air, heavier and more oppressive than anything she had previously experienced. "Thorne?" Lyra called out, her voice trembling slightly. There was no reply. She reached for the door, her hand shaking. As her fingers brushed against the cold wood, a wave of nausea overwhelmed her. The air surrounding the cabin pulsed with a dark, malevolent energy. Lyra pushed the door inward, stepping into the inky interior. A gust of wind rushed through the cabin, carrying with it the stench of decay and something else, something ancient and foul. "Thorne?" She called again, her voice echoing in the silent space. A figure shifted in the shadows, rising from a chair in the corner of the room. It was Thorne, but altered. His eyes blazed with an unearthly glow, his face gaunt and ashen. A dark energy crackled around him, distorting the air itself. "What do you seek?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth or empathy. Lyra took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. This was not the Thorne she knew. This was something else, corrupted and twisted by the encroaching darkness. We need your help, Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. Something is happening in the Pack lands. Dark magic. Thorne laughed, a hollow, chilling sound that raised gooseflesh on her arms. Dark magic? Why should I concern myself with the Pack lands? They are in danger, Thorne, Lyra pleaded. We all are. Thorne stared at them, his eyes burning with an unholy fire. Danger? Is that what you fear? I embrace it. It is the only truth. He raised a hand, and a surge of dark energy erupted toward them, knocking them off their feet. Lyra landed heavily, gasping for air. She looked up at Thorne, her eyes filled with horror. You cannot help us, can you? She whispered. You are part of it, aren't you? Thorne smiled, a cruel, twisted expression. Perhaps, or perhaps I am simply weary of feigning concern. He turned away, receding back into the shadows. Lyra and Lyra lay on the floor, struggling for breath, the terrible truth dawning upon them. The darkness was not merely infiltrating their lands. It had already ensnared the one individual they believed could save them. Signs of intrusion, the forest was holding its breath, an eerie stillness that sunk into Lyra's bones as she surveyed the desolate clearing. This wasn't the tranquility of slumbering nature. It was a suffocating hush, pregnant with unseen malice. The usual breeze, a comforting whisper through the canopy, had vanished, leaving the leaves petrified. The familiar fragrance of earth and pine, normally a balm to her spirit, was corrupted by a sharp, coppery taint that stung her nostrils. Kneeling, she sifted the sterile soil through her gloved fingers. It crumbled like ash. No life stirred, not even the scuttle of insects. It wasn't death by natural causes, but a deliberate act of obliteration. Lyra, her face a canvas of worry, stood back near the trees, eyes sweeping the perimeter. What do you think caused this, Lyra? She murmured, her voice barely audible. Dark magic, Lyra stated, the words bitter on her tongue. The artifact was just a conduit, the power it originates elsewhere. Rising, she fixed her gaze on the bordering woods. Let's trace its path. They skirted the edge of the corrupted land, Lyra leading, her senses sharpened to a razor's edge. A faint thrum of dark magic clung to the trees. A subtle vibration she felt like a discordant note against her skin. The bark felt coarse, the leaves crackled at the slightest touch, and the air carried an unnatural chill. Then she spotted it. A carving, subtly woven into the bark's natural contours. Once noticed, it seemed to sear itself into her awareness, a spiral, fractured in 3 places, with jagged lines radiating outwards like a shattered sun. Its design was unlike any symbol within their pack's collective knowledge. Lyra, look at this. Lyra moved closer, her breath catching as she registered the etching. What does it mean? I don't know, Lyra admitted, tracing its outline with a gloved finger. But it feels wrong. It echoes the artifact's energy. Their search continued, uncovering more glyphs, each more unsettling than the last. A circle bisected by a downward arrow, a latticework of interconnected triangles, a grotesque wolf caricature with malevolent eyes. Each was placed with careful precision, concealed yet present, as if marking a claim while evading easy discovery. A shiver snaked down Lyra's spine. This was no mere prank. It was an intentional trespass, a sinister message writ on the land. Something wicked was encroaching, and these symbols were its sinister signature. We need to decipher these, Lyra declared, her voice steady despite the gnawing fear. These are alien to our traditions. I've never encountered anything like them. Where do we even begin? Lyra questioned, her brow furrowed. The library, Lyra responded. The ancient codices, they might hold the key. The library was a haven, a repository of lore and legend. Sunbeams pierced the tall windows, illuminating swirling dust motes and countless ancient volumes bound in leather and vellum. The scent of aged paper and beeswax usually soothed Lyra, but today it did little to quell the anxiety gripping her. Hours bled into one another as she and Lyra immersed themselves in the texts, their fingers ghosting over faded script, their eyes devouring countless pages. They hunted for any mention of the forest symbols, any clue to illuminate their meaning. Scrolls detailing forgotten rites, bestiaries of mythical entities, histories of vanished empires, they scrutinized everything, their hope dwindling with the waning light. The library, though brimming with knowledge, seemed to withhold the answers they sought. As dusk deepened, casting long shadows across the room, Lyra unearthed something. A slim, unassuming book in dark leather, its pages brittle and yellowed. Signum demonium, signs of the demon. Her pulse quickened as she gingerly opened the volume, its spine groaning in protest. The script was in a nearly indecipherable tongue, a hybrid of ancient Latin and something darker. But she grasped its essence. It detailed symbols employed by dark magic practitioners to summon and command demonic entities. Glyphs of binding, corruption, and destruction. Flipping through the fragile leaves, her blood turned to ice. She recognized one. The spiral, fractured in 3 places. It signified disruption, weakening magical wards and creating pathways for dark energy, a marker of intrusion, claiming territory for a malignant power. Lyra shared the passage with Lyra, who gasped at the translation. This is horrifying, Lyra stammered, her voice laced with dread. Someone is deliberately opening our lands to something evil. Lyra nodded, her mind reeling. The artifact, the blighted clearing, the symbols, it all coalesced into a calculated assault on their territory. And Thorne, a wave of nausea swept over her at the thought. His unsettling conduct, his detachment, the shadow clinging to him, could he be complicit? Could he be the architect of this malevolent gateway? The notion was almost unbearable, yet she couldn't dismiss it. He had severed their connection. Embraced dark energies, he was capable of anything. We must inform the pack, Lyra urged, her voice urgent. They need to be warned. Not yet, Lyra countered, her mind already formulating a strategy. If Thorne is involved, alerting him is a risk we can't afford. We need more evidence, a clearer understanding of the threat's scope before we act. But what if it's already too late? Lyra protested. What if this evil is already among us? Then we stand and fight, Lyra declared, her voice steel-edged with resolve. We will safeguard our pack, whatever the cost, even if it means confronting Thorne himself. She closed the book, the weight of its revelations pressing down on her. The battle was engaged, and she knew, with a bone-chilling certainty, that it would decide the fate of their pack's very soul. Unheeded warnings, Lyra found Thorne near the training grounds, his powerful frame silhouetted against the waning sunlight. A group of younger wolves sparred under the watchful eyes of Beta Jasper, their movements quick and precise. Thorne, however, remained detached, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. She hesitated, the weight of her discovery pressing heavily on her shoulders. The clearing, the symbols it all pointed to a darkness she couldn't ignore, and a growing suspicion that Thorne was somehow involved. She approached him cautiously, the crunch of leaves under her paws drawing his attention. His golden eyes, once warm and inviting, now held a chilling indifference. "Thorne, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. He turned fully to face her, his jaw tight. "About what, Lyra? Surely the pack isn't crumbling to dust while I'm overseeing training." The edge in his tone was unmistakable, a constant reminder of the distance that had grown between them. Lyra ignored the barb, focusing on the urgency of her message. "I was patrolling the eastern border with Lyra. We found something unsettling." She paused, searching for the right words. "A clearing, marked with symbols. Dark magic, Thorne." It felt deliberate. Thorne's expression didn't change. He crossed his arms. A gesture that used to convey comfort now felt like a barrier. "Dark magic? Lyra, the forest is old. There are remnants of things we don't understand. It doesn't mean anything." "It does mean something," she insisted, pulling out the charcoal rubbing she'd made of one of the symbols. She held it out to him. "I found this symbol in the ancient texts. It's a marker, a sign of intrusion. Someone is opening our territory to something else." He glanced at the rubbing, his eyes narrowing slightly before dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "Lyra, you're letting your imagination run wild. You're seeing shadows where there are none. Perhaps all this time alone is getting to you." Her frustration flared. "Imagination? Thorne." I felt it. The air was thick with malice. "This isn't some fairy tale. This is real, and it's happening on our land." She stepped closer, her voice rising. "Don't you understand the danger this poses to the pack?" He finally met her gaze, his eyes hardening. "I understand perfectly. What I don't understand is why you're questioning my judgment. Why you're running around, stirring up fear when you should be trusting me to handle things." "To trusting you?" Lyra's voice cracked with disbelief. "How can I trust you when you won't even acknowledge the problem? When you dismiss everything I say?" The pain of their broken bond, the constant ache of his absence, surged within her. It was a physical blow, robbing her of breath. "I am the Alpha, Lyra," Thorne said, his voice low and dangerous. "My decisions are not up for debate. Your role is to support me, not to undermine my authority." "Support you?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "Is that what you think this is about? Authority? This is about protecting our pack, Thorne. About preventing something terrible from happening. And if you're too blind or too stubborn to see it, then I'll do whatever it takes to stop it myself." He took a step towards her, his presence suddenly overwhelming. The air crackled with tension. "Are you threatening me, Lyra?" "No," she said, standing her ground despite the fear that coiled in her stomach. "I'm promising you, I will not stand by and watch this pack be destroyed, because you're too proud to admit you might be wrong." A muscle ticked in his jaw. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mask of cold fury. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the gathering darkness. The sound of his retreating footsteps echoed in the sudden silence, a stark reminder of the chasm that had opened between them. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. She watched him go, a knot of fear tightening in her chest. Something was terribly wrong. He was dismissing her warnings, not out of confidence, but out of something darker. Something she couldn't quite grasp, but knew, with chilling certainty, that she had to uncover. The wolves training in the field had stopped and were watching the exchange. Jasper gave Lyra a knowing look of concern before directing the trainees back to their exercises. Lyra knew she had to proceed carefully. If Thorne wouldn't listen, she'd have to find someone who would. She needed to investigate further, gather more evidence. But she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The darkness was encroaching, and Thorne, the one person who should be leading the fight against it, was instead walking blindly towards the abyss. The elder's wisdom behind the elder's cottage, in a sun-drenched haven of herbs, Lyra discovered Lyra tending her garden. The air vibrated with the sleepy drone of bees and the comforting scent of chamomile. Hesitation clung to Lyra like a second skin, burdened by unvoiced suspicions. These anxieties were a solitary weight, shared with no one. Not even Liam. Trust had become a precious, easily shattered vase. Lyra, Lyra breathed, her voice a mere thread of sound. The elder turned, ancient eyes, the color of faded amethyst, webbed with fine lines that deepened with her kind expression. Her face, etched with the stories of decades, held a universe of knowing. Lyra, child, join me. Lyra indicated a nearby stone, draped in velvety moss. The moonflowers bloom before their time this year. A harbinger, perhaps? Lyra settled onto the cool stone, a shiver tracing her spine. Of what? She pressed, unable to mask the tremors in her tone. Lyra plucked a sprig of lavender, releasing a sharp, clarifying fragrance. That depends, dear one, on the burdens you carry. What ails your spirit? Lyra inhaled deeply. The dam burst a torrent of fears and uncertainties. She recounted her discoveries in the clearing, the ominous symbols, Thorne's unsettling dismissal, the creeping disquiet within the pack. She omitted only the constant, dull ache of their severed bond, a secret sadness, too raw to speak aloud. Lyra listened, her gaze a steady anchor in Lyra's storm. When Lyra fell silent, a long stillness descended, punctuated only by the trill of crickets. Finally, Lyra spoke, her tone low and grave. The darkness you sense is no phantom. It clings to Thorne. Lyra's hope plummeted. You knew. I suspected, Lyra amended. The shadows gather at dusk. The wind carries whispers of old powers waking. Thorne's evolution exacted a steep price. He craved strength, a shortcut to security, and in his haste, he unlocked a door to a something saw. Perilous. What manner of peril? Lyra urged, her voice strained. Lyra exhaled, a sound like leaves skittering across stone. Dark magic always extracts a debt. In Thorne's case, it appears to be his very essence, his empathy, his connection to the pack, his soul. The more he yields to the power, the further he loses himself. Nausea roiled in Lyra's stomach. Can it be reversed? Not easily, Lyra cautioned, her eyes pools of ancient wisdom. The path back is riddled with thorns. He must willingly renounce the shadows, sever the tether that binds him. But with each passing moment, the task grows harder. And if he refuses? Lyra whispered, each word heavy with despair. Lyra's gaze softened with empathy. Then the darkness will engulf him. And through him, it will poison the pack. It will warp our strength, our loyalty, into something monstrous. Lyra shuddered, a tremor rippling through her. What can I do? Lyra clasped Lyra's hand, her touch surprisingly firm. Trust the compass within you, child. You possess an inner strength, a resilience you underestimate. You perceive what others overlook. You feel what they disregard. Do not second-guess yourself. But Thorne is the Alpha, Lyra protested. They won't heed my words if I challenge him. They will listen if you speak with conviction and truth, Lyra countered. Expose the festering darkness. Show them the cost of inaction. Remind them of the sacred bonds that unite us, the principles we hold dear. But what if I err? Lyra whispered, the familiar fear creeping back. What if my judgment is clouded? Lyra squeezed her hand. Even if you miscalculate, it is far wiser to err on the side of caution than to stand paralyzed while darkness unfurls. The pack requires a guardian, Lyra. And perhaps so does Thorne. But he rejected me, Lyra confessed, the pain still a raw wound. He severed our bond. Ilara's expression softened further. A bond forged in genuine connection is not so easily undone, child. Magic can fray the threads, but the core endures. You still sense him, don't you? Lyra averted her gaze, tears pricking her eyelids. She nodded, speechless. The elder saw too deeply. That link, that enduring tie, may be your most potent weapon, Lyra observed gently. It is a beacon in the encroaching night, a reminder of the man he once was, the man he can still become. Never underestimate its power, Lyra, and never let fear eclipse your reason. Lyra released her hand and slowly rose to her feet, her movements deliberate but steady. The road ahead will be arduous, child. There will be difficult choices, sacrifices to endure. But you are not alone. Trust in your strength, trust in your instincts, and trust in the enduring power of connection. Lyra watched Lyra retreat into her cottage, the weight of her words settling upon her. The elder's wisdom had confirmed her deepest fears, but it had also ignited a purpose within her, a spark of hope amidst the gathering gloom. She understood what was required of her. She had to safeguard the pack, even if it meant standing against the man she loved, and somehow she had to find a way to reach Thorne, to reignite the ember of light within him before it was lost forever. She rose to her feet, the firm earth grounding her. The sun beat down upon her face, a silent pledge of the fortitude she would need for the trials ahead. The air still thrummed with the drowsy drone of bees, but now it seemed like a call to arms, a testament to the vital life she was sworn to defend. She departed the clearing, her steps measured and resolute, the fear still present, but dwarfed by a burgeoning sense of resolve. She would not allow the darkness to prevail. She would fight for her pack, she would fight for Thorne, and she would fight for the enduring power of connection that united them all. Shadows at the border, the reek assaulted them first, feral musk turned earth, and a caustic tang, like burnt caramel, the signature of wolves far beyond redemption. Liam, barely initiated, tightened his grip on his spear, the rough-hewn shaft biting into his palm. Beside him, Maya, a veteran warrior and keen observer, merely narrowed her gaze, her fingers hovering over the silver-inlaid grip of her blade. An unnatural hush descended upon the wood's birdsong vanished, leaving a heavy silence that crawled across the skin. "They're close," Maya breathed, her voice a mere whisper against the shush of the leaves. Then they erupted from the tangled undergrowth. Not the scrawny, desperate wolves that occasionally trespassed the boundary, but powerfully built werewolves, their eyes gleaming with wicked intelligence, their snarls resonating through the timber. A quintet of them, easily overpowering Liam and Maya with raw strength alone. Leading them was Kael, a hulking brute with fur the color of congealed blood, his canines exposed in a predatory sneer. "Well, well," Kael rasped, his voice a jagged file. "Thorne's little cubs, guarding the henhouse. How quaint." Liam's youthful courage flared, momentarily eclipsing his apprehension. "This is pack territory," he retorted, clamping down harder on the spear. "Turn back now, and you might survive. Kael threw back his head, a harsh, grating laugh that vibrated through Liam. Survive? You believe we fear oblivion? We court it. Thorne's weakness has festered long enough. We're here to reclaim what is rightfully ours. He swept a taloned hand toward the deep forest beyond Liam and Maya. This land will revert. Maya advanced, her gaze locked on Kael. Thorne is stronger than you imagine. You will not pass. Her tone was even, controlled, but beneath it, Liam sensed coiled power, poised to unleash. Kael's sneer deepened, revealing teeth grotesquely elongated, sharpened to a point. We shall see, little warrior. We shall see. With a bestial roar, he surged forward, his pack at his heels. The forest floor became a maelstrom of fur, fangs, and claws. Liam, despite rigorous training, was immediately hammered. Kael's pack fought with a savage abandon, their movements erratic, their strikes implacable. He deflected a blow that would have split his skull, the impact jarring him to his core. He lunged with his spear, connecting with the side of one of the wolves, but the beast barely registered it, merely snapping at the weapon before disengaging. Maya battled with grim efficiency, her silver blade a dazzling dance. She moved with surprising swiftness, evading and parrying through the chaos, striking with lethal precision. One wolf crumpled with a strangled sob, its throat neatly bisected. But even her prowess couldn't staunch the assault. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and steadily losing ground. A searing pain ripped through Liam's leg, causing him to cry out, faltering. He looked down to see Kael towering over him, eyes burning with triumph. Foolish whelp, Kael growled, raising a clawed hand. You should have fled. Before Kael could strike, Maya hurled herself at him, shoving him away from Liam with a fierce bellow. She positioned herself between Liam and Kael, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her blade slick with blood. "Run, Liam," she urged, her voice cracking. "Return to the village. Warn them." Liam hesitated, torn between duty and terror. But he knew Maya was right. He was useless here. Summoning a surge of adrenaline, he scrambled to his feet and retreated into the woods, ignoring the throbbing agony in his leg. He could hear the sounds of conflict escalating behind him, the growls, the ululations, the sickening smack of flesh meeting flesh. He didn't dare risk a backward glance. He fled. The village air hung heavy with the fragrance of wood smoke and roasting game, of the near of normality masking the unease beneath. Children shrieked with delight as they played tag around the square, their calls echoing across the open space. Lyra stood by the well, hoisting water, her mind still churning from her confrontation with Lyra. The burden of their secret, the knowledge of Thorne's corruption, weighed on her like shackles. She felt the familiar pang of their fractured connection, a constant reminder of what she'd forfeited, of what he'd carelessly discarded. Suddenly, a blood-curdling howl tore through the air, dissolving the idyllic scene. The children stilled, their joyous cries abruptly silenced. Adults paused in their tasks, their faces etched with worry. It was a border sentinel's cry, a signal of grave emergency. A frigid dread seized Lyra. She knew, instinctively, that a dire situation was unfolding. Moments later, Liam staggered into the village square, ashen-faced, his clothes shredded, his leg weeping blood. He collapsed at Lyra's feet, his voice raspy with exertion. "Rogue werewolves," he panted. "They attacked the border Kalamia." His voice trailed off, his eyes wide with agony and alarm. The ensuing silence was profound, broken only by Liam's labored breathing. Then, pandemonium erupted. Warriors snatched up weapons, their expressions resolute. Women herded their offspring inside their dwellings, barricading the entrances. Lyra knelt beside Liam, her hands trembling slightly. "How many?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Liam shook his head, his gaze unfocused. 5 maybe more. They were powerful. Miyashi held them back. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, her heart hammering in her chest. 5 feral werewolves, led by Kael. A breach at the border. And Maya, one of their most seasoned fighters, standing her ground alone. This wasn't a simple raid. This was an incursion. And Thorne, lost in his inner darkness, was nowhere to be found. The mantle of leadership descended upon Lyra, heavy and cold. She had to intervene. She had to safeguard her pack, even if it entailed defying Thorne, even if it meant confronting Kael and his pack unaided. She rose to her feet, her eyes blazing with newfound resolve. "Get him to the healers," she instructed the nearest villager, her voice clear and ringing. "Then, prepare for battle." Alpha's reckoning. The war room stank of stale fear and old sweat. Thorne, a diminished specter of the leader he once was bent low over the scarred map of their territory. Bloodshot eyes, reflecting the torch's uneven light, followed the familiar lines. His most trusted warriors, Gareth, Bronwyn, and young Kieran, stood in a circle, their faces etched with worry. Anxieties, unspoken but palpable, formed a stifling shroud, spun from recent defeats and the approaching specter of future ones. "Kael will return," Thorne croaked, his voice a fractured echo of its former resonance. His finger, trembling, traced the border where Kael's pack had recently trespassed, leaving a bitter trace like a festering sore. "He's tasted our blood. He knows we are vulnerable." Gareth, his second, a mountain of a man whose brow seemed permanently creased with concern, offered, "Patrols are doubled, Alpha. The borders are as secure as we can make them." But even his reassurance rang hollow. Thorne gave a mirthless bark. "Secure? You call that a scattering of bodies secure?" Kael sliced through our perimeter like a predator through a flock. We were caught napping. We were careless. Bronwyn, the pack's keen strategist, her intellect as sharp as any blade, stepped forward. "We suffered a surprise attack, Thorne. We've analyzed the failure. Reinforcing the western ridge, our weakest point, is paramount." Kieran, barely past his initiation, his face unnaturally pale with a cocktail of fear and heightened senses, blurted, "What about Lyra, Alpha? Shouldn't she be here? Lend her aid?" The query landed like a poisoned barb. Thorne visibly recoiled, his jaw clenching tight. Mention of Lyra ripped open a raw wound, a tangible reminder of the severance he had forced. He met Kieran's gaze, his own hardening. "Lyra is indisposed. This is internal pack business. We will manage it." He pivoted back to the map, avoiding their scrutiny, the weight of his choice pressing heavily on his shoulders. He felt the subtle disapproval, the unspoken questions. They couldn't grasp the darkness that had taken root within him, the terror driving him to ostracize Lyra. He recalled the prophecy, whispered by the elders, dismissed as fable until it had begun to materialize with terrifying accuracy. A prophecy speaking of a creeping shadow, a perversion that would consume the Alpha line, turning Guardian into destroyer. He had glimpsed the encroaching blackness, tasted its acridity, felt its tendrils seeking his heart. Panic had seized him. He had acted, believing it to be the only path to safeguard his pack, to insulate them from the monster he feared becoming. But had his actions truly protected them? Or had he merely set them on a path to annihilation? He studied the faces of his warriors, their fidelity ingrained into their expressions, their scars. He detected the nervousness in their gaze, a reflection of his own inner turmoil. He was meant to be their bastion, their shield, their unwavering beacon. Instead, he felt like a charlatan, a fractured entity about to shatter. Severing his link with Lyra, he had imagined it would dilute the corruption within, fortify him. Instead, it had left him weakened, empty, more vulnerable to the encroaching abyss. He had sacrificed their bond, their affection, their shared future, all under the guise of protection. And now he questioned the very wisdom of the exchange. "We must prepare," he breathed, scarcely audible. "Kael will probe our defenses. He will exploit any fracture. Vigilance is key. Ruthlessness is mandatory." His gaze locked with Gareth's. "Bolster the western ridge. Lay snares. Leverage every advantage we possess." He then turned to Bronwyn. "Double patrols along the eastern flank as well. Kael might attempt an encirclement." Finally, he met Kieran's gaze, his eyes softening almost imperceptibly. "Stay close to Gareth. Learn from him. Cultivate courage, but temper it with wisdom." He watched them depart, their faces set with resolve, yet he saw the creeping doubt that shadowed their eyes. They placed their faith in him, entrusted him to guide them to safety. But he doubted his worthiness. He questioned his capacity to guide them anywhere but to their demise. He slumped into the worn leather chair behind the war table, burying his face in his hands. The responsibility he bore crushed him, an unbearable burden. He was the Alpha. He was sworn to shield his pack. But how could he defend them when he was powerless to defend himself? Closing his eyes, Lyra's face bloomed in his mind, her eyes brimming with love and worry, her hand reaching for his. He saw the anguish in her gaze when he had turned her away, a heartbreak mirrored within his own soul. He had broken her, shattered their bond, all in the name of safeguarding her. Yet, had he truly? Or had he merely ensured their mutual? The darkness stirred within, a malignant entity reveling in his despair. It purred promises of might, of resilience, of a path to protect his pack, regardless of the price. He resisted, clinging desperately to the remnants of his humanity. But the darkness was unyielding, insidious, steadily eroding his will, devouring his soul. He knew he was losing ground. He felt himself slipping, edging closer to the brink of annihilation. And he dreaded that when he finally succumbed, he would plunge his entire pack into the darkness along with him. A debt repaid the forest floor, a layered carpet of fallen leaves and rich earth, usually soothed Thorne with its earthy fragrance. Today, it only deepened the disquiet churning within him. He patrolled the perimeter, ostensibly, but his mind was a battlefield echoing with Lyra's unspoken accusation from the previous night. He was isolating himself, a lone wolf driving away his own. Rounding a bend in the overgrown trail, the air thrummed. A warning delivered a heartbeat too late. 3 figures solidified from the gloom, their eyes burning with the virulent, bile-green fire of Kael's corrupted pack. Thorne's snarl ripped from his throat as he shifted instinctively, but they were too swift. A wave of shadow stuff slammed into him, vacuuming the air from his lungs and sending him sprawling against the rough bark of an ancient oak. He pushed himself up, the coppery tang of blood coating his tongue. "Kael," he spat, recognizing the sneering visage of his rival emerging from behind his lackeys. "Resorting to underhanded tactics, I see." Kael chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Underhanded? Let's call it expedient. You've grown soft, Thorne, weakened. It's almost pitiful. With a dismissive wave, he signaled his pack. Eliminate him. The corrupted wolves surged forward, claws extended, fangs bared. Thorne met their onslaught in a furious dance of muscle and claw. He possessed greater strength, superior speed, yet they were implacable, fueled by a dark enchantment that heightened their aggression and numbed their pain. His strikes landed with seemingly diminished impact, were grinding him down. A searing agony erupted in his side as one of the wolves managed to score a deep gash across his flank. He faltered, his vision swimming. This was the end, a bleak realization washing over him. Not a glorious last stand, but a pathetic death in the dirt. Then a howl tore through the stillness, a sound so pristine and ferocious it momentarily paralyzed the corrupted wolves. A figure, a blur of motion, shot past Thorne. Lyra, he could only watch, stunned, as she wove between the corrupted wolves. A swift, moving tempest of silver fur and glinting teeth. Familiar with every contour of this land, every twisted root, every hidden depression, she exploited the terrain, leading the wolves on wild goose chases, tripping them over fallen timber, twisting their own momentum against them. "Lyra, get out!" Thorne bellowed, struggling to stand. He couldn't bear the thought of her getting hurt. Not because of him. She ignored him, her gaze a laser focus of determination. "I made a promise, Thorne," she snarled, parrying a vicious swipe. "I protect my pack. And that includes you, whether you want me to or not." Thorne watched her battle, a turbulent mix of resentment and admiration churning within him. He had tried to sever their connection, deny their bond, convince himself that solitude was his only shield. Yet here she was, risking her life. One of the corrupted wolves broke free from Lyra's whirlwind assault and lunged at Thorne, malice blazing in its eyes. He steeled himself for the impact, but it never came. A battering ram of brown fur slammed into the corrupted wolf, sending it tumbling. Ronan, his beta, and a surging wave of other pack members, answering Lyra's rallying cry. The advantage shifted. Outnumbered, the corrupted wolves crumbled. Kael, witnessing the reversal, snarled in bitter frustration. "This isn't over, Thorne," he hissed, dissolving back into the shadows with his remaining followers. Silence reclaimed the forest, punctuated only by the ragged gasps of the pack. Lyra stood, chest heaving, her pelt streaked with mud and blood, yet her eyes glittered with defiance. She turned towards Thorne, her expression an enigma. He stared back, wordless. He anticipated anger, reproach, anything but the quiet concern mirrored in her gaze. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly, edging closer. He flinched, the echo of their broken bond reverberating within him. "I don't need your help, Lyra," he managed, the words like gravel in his mouth. Her expression shuddered. "Maybe not," she countered, her voice taut. "But the pack does, and you're their alpha. Start acting like one." She turned, melting into the trees. Thorne watched her go, a sharp pang of guilt twisting in his gut. He had fractured their bond, rejected her affection, and still she had risked all to save him. He had justified his actions as protection, but all he had accomplished was pushing them away, throwing open the gates for Kael. He glanced down at his bloodied hands. A spark ignited within him, a flicker of the leader he once was. The man who would never have allowed Lyra to place herself in such peril. The man who would have defended his pack with his last breath. Ronan approached with caution. "Alpha," he said, his voice respectful. "We should get you back to the den. Your wounds need tending." Thorne nodded, allowing Ronan to assist him, As they retreated through the woods, the image of Lyra's unwavering courage haunted him. He had severed their bond, but her loyalty remained. And perhaps, just perhaps, a part of him still clung to her. The fear that had driven him began to subside, supplanted by a fragile hope. Maybe it wasn't too late to mend what was broken. Maybe it wasn't too late to embrace his role as Alpha. Perhaps, with Lyra's strength, he could still repel the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. He knew he could never fully repay the debt Lyra had incurred. The starting point was to acknowledge the truth. He needed her, more than he had ever dared to admit. The confrontation, the reek of damp earth and old blood clung to Lyra as she moved toward Thorne's quarters. The packhouse air vibrated with a skittish energy, a low-frequency dread that resonated with her own racing pulse. She shoved the massive oak door inward, its hinges emitting a mournful groan, the sound lost in the stifling quiet within. Thorne stood sentinel at the window, his back a rigid plane beneath the dark leather of his tunic. The hearth fire spat and hissed, its shifting light painting the harsh planes of his face. He didn't so much as twitch. His lack of acknowledgement felt like a tangible barrier. "You nearly bled out there," Lyra stated, her voice taut, fighting to subdue the tremor of fear that surged through her at the thought of losing him. Thorne remained unmoving. "I managed." His voice, devoid of its usual warmth, was a flat monotone. "Managed? Kael's dogs almost tore you apart. Had I not intervened." She allowed the unspoken conclusion to hang, a heavy weight in the room. He finally pivoted, his eyes glacial. "You shouldn't have interfered." The words struck like a physical blow, stealing her breath. "What?" "I didn't require your assistance," Thorne declared, his tone icy. "I require no one's aid." A hot, sharp wave of fury washed over her. "That's a fabrication, Thorne. And you know it. You were outmaneuvered, vulnerable. Stubborn pride nearly cost you your life. And what of the pack? Are you so absorbed in your whatever this self-imposed exile is that you can't perceive the danger looming over us all?" He advanced, his jaw clenched tight. "I am safeguarding the pack. By isolating yourself? By alienating those who would stand with you, who would fight beside you? By destroying the connection that made us formidable?" Lyra challenged, her voice gaining volume. "That's not protection, Thorne. That's dereliction." The accusation landed, a palpable thing in the air. A flicker of something, perhaps pain, perhaps regret, crossed Thorne's face before he masked it. "You wouldn't understand." "Then illuminate me," Lyra demanded, closing the distance. "Tell me the rationale behind your actions. Explain why you discarded what we shared, what we were. Tell me why you are content to jeopardize everything for this solitude." He averted his gaze, focusing on the swirling flames. "The situation is complicated." "Complicated?" Lyra scoffed, her voice laced with disbelief. "Dark sorcery is poisoning our lands. Kael is amassing a force of rogue wolves, and you dismiss it as complicated? People are dying, Thorne. Our community is unraveling. We need you to lead, not to retreat." Thorne maintained his silence, a wall between them, frustratingly solid. Lyra took another step, until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I am certain you can feel it too," she whispered, her tone softening into awe. A plea. The encroaching darkness. It's beyond Kael. It's something ancient, something that feasts on our anxieties, exploits our vulnerabilities. He finally locked eyes with her, his eyes reflecting a turmoil she hadn't witnessed since the night he performed the ritual to sever their bond. "What is it you want me to do, Lyra?" "I want you to lead, she responded, her voice resolute. I want you to embody the alpha I am certain you can be. I want you to fight, not merely for yourself, but for the pack, for all of us. And how do you suggest I accomplish that? He countered, a hint of skepticism coloring his voice. Lyra took a deep breath. We do it together. I realize you severed the bond, but some resonance remains. I can still sense you, Thorne. A faint echo, a ghost of what existed. And I know, intrinsically, that you can still sense me as well. His jaw tightened further. Don't what? Don't acknowledge the truth lingering between us? Don't remind you of what you sacrificed? Lyra pressed her advantage. We must cooperate, Thorne. Not as mates, not as we once were, but as collaborators, as leaders. We must synthesize our strengths, our knowledge, our proficiencies to safeguard the pack. She extended her hand, palm open, a silent invitation. Permit me to assist you, Thorne. Allow me to assist you in saving our pack. He stared at her outstretched hand, his gaze intense, as if contemplating a momentous, life-altering decision. The silence deepened, heavy and pregnant with anticipation, broken only by the fire's insistent crackle and pop. Lyra held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears. Would he accept? Would he finally emerge from the chrysalis of darkness that had enveloped him? At last, slowly, Thorne began to raise his own hand. He didn't grasp hers. Instead, he halted inches away, his fingers hovering, not quite making contact. "What is your proposition?" he asked, his voice rough with disuse. Lyra refused to waver. She kept her hand extended, her gaze unwavering. "We initiate by discovering the source of the corruption plaguing our land. The forces driving Kael, the authentic nature of this ancient darkness. And how do you envision us accomplishing that?" Thorne questioned, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Together," Lyra reiterated, her voice firm. "We will investigate in tandem. We will leverage our combined skills, our insight into the pack, into the land, to unveil the truth." Thorne remained mute for an extended moment, his gaze probing hers. Finally, he expelled a long, deliberate breath. "Very well," he conceded, his voice barely audible. "We proceed according to your plan. But on my terms. No intimacy. No expectations. Merely an alliance. Is that understood?" A ripple of disappointment coursed through Lyra, but she kept her expression neutral. This was not a love confession. Not a revival of their shattered bond. It was a transaction, a calculated partnership. However, it was a beginning. A hairline fracture in the formidable wall Thorne had erected around himself. "Understood," she replied, her voice clear and strong. She lowered her hand, a small victory won. "Then let us begin." Reluctant allies Thorne locked eyes with Lyra. Emberlight danced within her gaze, defiant and unwavering. The stark honesty of her words, a strength he desperately tried to dismiss, finally cracked the shell of darkness he'd cultivated. Reflected in her gaze, he saw a truth he'd buried deep. Utter failure. He wasn't just failing himself. The entire pack teetered on the brink. That weight crashed down, a frigid mass in his stomach. He swallowed, the motion a struggle. "Fine," he ground out, the word a rusty thing on his tongue. "Your way." No triumphant smirk graced Lyra's face. Instead, a quiet relief flickered across her features, a silent measure of his sacrifice. The pride he shelved. "Good," she replied, her tone firm yet gentle. Tomorrow, we begin. Dawn arrived bruised, the sky awash in shades of violet and raw orange as the pack gathered. The clearing thrummed with anticipation, thick with unease. They were accustomed to Thorne's solitary drills, his harsh commands echoing from the periphery. Lyra's presence beside him signaled a tectonic shift. Thorne stood rigid, his gaze skimming over faces etched with mingled hope and dread. He sensed Lyra's warmth beside him, a strange anchor he stubbornly ignored, focusing instead on the looming task. Today, his voice resonated through the space. We answer the challenge. He saw a spark of resolve ignite, mirroring the inner fire that fueled Lyra. Lyra will be working alongside me. Her assistance is crucial to your progress. The words tasted bitter, yet he forced them out. Lyra moved forward, radiating self-assurance. Our focus will be strategy, teamwork, and adaptability. The enemy is shrewd. We must be sharper. Her voice was clear, commanding, filling the clearing with purpose. The training was brutal. Thorne pushed bodies to their breaking point, refining strength and celerity. Lyra, meanwhile, forged mental resilience, orchestrating tactical exercises and demanding quick thinking. She crafted simulations of diverse assault scenarios, goading them to predict enemy movements. Initially, their efforts were clumsy, the pack struggling to find its footing in this new dance. Thorne's directives often clashed with Lyra's, breeding confusion and dissent. Yet, as days blurred into weeks, a rhythm emerged. Thorne's brute force melded with Lyra's keen intellect, forged a potent synergy, a force greater than either could achieve independently. One afternoon, during a mock battle, Kael, a young wolf, floundered against a seasoned adversary. Thorne's jaw clenched, poised to intervene. Lyra raised a hand, halting him. "Kael," she called, her voice even and encouraging. "Remember our discussion. Use your speed. Don't meet strength with strength. Outwit him." Kael hesitated, then inhaled deeply and shifted his weight. Instead of a direct assault, he flowed into motion, evading, weaving, leveraging his smaller stature. He landed rapid, calculated blows, disorienting his opponent until the larger wolf conceded. A swell of cheers erupted, and Thorne felt a grudging admiration bloom within him. She had glimpsed a potential he'd overlooked. As time wore on, Thorne found himself studying Lyra's movements. He observed her interaction with the pack, genuine concern etched on her features. Their response, trust and respect vivid in their eyes. He even began anticipating her insights during drills, subtly altering his tactics to weave with hers, an almost imperceptible adaptation. One evening, after a grueling session, Lyra and Thorne found themselves alone. The setting sun cast elongated silhouettes, painting the sky with vibrant hues. Silence hung heavy, pierced only by the chirping of crickets. "They are improving," Lyra observed, her voice a soft breath. Thorne nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon's rim. Indeed, a comfortable stillness descended, devoid of animosity and resentment. A space forged by shared goals, mutual respect. "Thank you," Thorne mumbled, the words faint. Lyra turned, her eyes searching his. "For what?" "For believing in them, even when I didn't," he admitted, his voice rough. "For not giving up on me." A delicate smile tugged at her lips. "I couldn't," she murmured. He looked at her, then truly saw her. The depth of her unwavering loyalty, the strength of enduring affection. The shadows began to recede, exposing a truth he could no longer ignore. His love for her endured. Though the bond was fractured, The connection remained an invisible thread still binding them. He reached out, his hand hovering, uncertain. Lyra held his gaze, her eyes reflecting a mix of longing and apprehension. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Lyra," he breathed, his voice thick with suppressed desire. Before another word could escape, a blood-curdling howl tore through the stillness. A sound of raw agony and stark terror that sent icy shards through their veins. Thorne and Lyra exchanged a grim glance. The true test was about to begin. The siege, the howl sliced through the darkness, a brutal rent in the forest's acoustic fabric. Not a challenge, nor a lament. It served as a war cry, laced with Kael's venomous intent. Before its echo fully dissipated, bedlam consumed the village. Rabid werewolves, their eyes glittering with savage hunger, surged from the trees, a furious avalanche of muscle and fang colliding with the village's makeshift bulwarks. Panic ignited, yet Lyra countered with a resonant bellow, a sound brimming with the alpha power she was destined to wield. "Stand firm," she commanded, her voice a blade cutting through the uproar. "For the pack, for our haven." The initial surge slammed against the barricade's sharpened timbers and toppled carts with savage force. The attackers clawed and scrabbled, their snarls reverberating as they probed for weakness. Pack members, armed with makeshift weaponry axes, spears, even cutlery, retaliated with desperate valor. The air thickened with the coppery reek of blood and fur, the acrid tang of dread, and the raw scream of conflict. Thorne, a maelstrom of contained rage against the invaders, moved with an unpitying efficiency that evoked mixed emotions in Lyra. Yet a certain coldness in his gaze, a disengagement, sent a deeper chill than the enemy's assault. He fought as if discharging an obligation, not safeguarding something precious. A hulking brute of a rogue, easily 7 feet tall, pulverized a section of the barricade, sending wood shards scattering. It lunged toward a mere boy, a pack member hardly old enough to undergo his first transformation. Without pause, Lyra propelled herself forward, shifting in midair, her wolf form a silver streak against the shadows. She slammed into the rogue, diverting its attack, giving the youth time to scramble away. The rogue snarled, its fetid breath carrying the stench of decay. It lashed out at Lyra with razor-sharp claws, tearing a painful wound across her shoulder. Ignoring the searing pain, she concentrated on the fray. She met the rogue's aggression with a primal ferocity, tearing and slashing, pushing it back toward the shattered defenses. "Lyra!" Thorne's voice rang out, a sharp warning. He stood next to her in an instant, his wolf form a tenebrous shadow cast by the moon. "Withdraw. Let me deal with this." "No," she growled, her gaze fixed on the rogue. "We stand together." He hesitated for a heartbeat, his eyes briefly meeting hers. For a fleeting instant, she glimpsed something deeper, a flicker of the man she knew, the mate she cherished. But it vanished in an instant, replaced by the impenetrable mask he wore so convincingly. "As you desire," he conceded, his voice void of feeling. He lunged, his movements precise and lethal, until the massive werewolf lay defeated and lifeless on the ground. They fought as one, a deadly dance against the tide of attackers. Lyra concentrated on the wolves pressing the assault, while Thorne covered their vulnerable sides. Each kill felt like a temporary reprieve in the face of impossible odds. The pack fought with the bravery born of defending their families, their community, their very lives. However, they were greatly outnumbered, and the rogues pressed their advance relentlessly. As the battle swelled, Lyra detected a pattern. The rogues lacked any coordinated offensive strategy. They simply hurled themselves at the defenses in an unending stream, as if compelled by a singular, overriding drive. She scanned the field, searching for Kael. He was nowhere on the front lines, instead, orchestrating the chaos from afar, using dark magic to amplify the rogue's frenzy. "Thorne!" she called out, dodging a snapping maw. "Kael isn't here. He's controlling them." Thorne grunted, slamming a rogue into a burning cart. "I had begun to suspect." "We have to locate him," Lyra said, urgency in her tone. "Sever the connection." "We cannot abandon the pack," Thorne replied, his gaze circling the tumult. "They require our protection." "They need us to stop this madness," Lyra asserted. "This is more than a simple raid. It is a full siege. If we don't stop Kael, they will continue to attack until we are all dead." Thorne's jaw tightened in hesitation. He knew Lyra spoke the truth, but he wrestled internally at the thought of risking the pack even more. He was stuck in the middle of duty and animal instinct, his logic strained against smoldering embers of feeling. A shattering scream split the darkness. A young woman, scarcely past her first transformation, was pulled to the ground by a gang of rogues. Lyra's core clenched with horror. They were beginning to lose ground. "Damn it all," Thorne thundered, his self-control momentarily broken. "Fine, we hunt for Kael, but we leave a stout defense. We must have faith in them." He turned to a battle-hardened warrior, a veteran of countless wars. "Gunnar, the responsibility is yours. Hold until we return." Gunnar nodded, his eyes filled with steely resolve. "We will not fail you, Alpha." Lyra and Thorne shared a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They were acutely aware of the risks, the slim odds. But they had no other recourse. They must stop Kael, or their community, their home, all that they cared about, would be lost forever. With a final roar, they darted into the woods, abandoning the siege's mayhem, and diving into the heart of the malevolence that threatened to devour everything. The vision of the fallen young woman spurred Lyra on. She quickened her pace, pushing Thorne to keep up. The pursuit of Kael had commenced. Target! Lyra the air thrummed with a malevolent energy. A metallic tang, sharp as shattered glass, filled Lyra's lungs as she deflected the brute's clumsy assault. Kael's perverted sorcery amplified each feral growl, transforming mere werewolves into maddened fiends. Yet, even amidst the pandemonium, a more acute threat pricked at Lyra's senses. A focused malice honing in on her. She knew, with chilling certainty, that she was Kael's primary target. Whipping around, she slashed with her silver-inlaid claws, narrowly avoiding a blow that would have ripped her jugular. "Look alive!" Gunnar's bellow reverberated through the melee as he slammed into the rogue, sending the creature reeling. "Kael's got a hard-on for you, Lyra. Stay frosty." Lyra acknowledged him with a nod, her gaze sweeping the chaotic scene. The battle's momentum was shifting, unfortunately not to their advantage. The magically augmented rogues seemed inexhaustible, their attacks unyielding. She glimpsed Thorne, a cyclone of controlled aggression, his movements economical and deadly, yet utterly devoid of warmth. He fought with the precision of a weapon, not the heart of a protector. A realization that twisted her insides. Then she spotted him. Kael, perched atop the wreckage of a broken wagon, eyes blazing with an unnatural, violet incandescence. He lifted a hand, and the rogues surrounding Lyra surged, a wall of fur and fangs poised to isolate her. "Lyra!" Kael's voice boomed across the clearing, magically amplified. "How gracious of you to grace us with your presence. I've been expecting you." She steeled herself, every nerve singing with alertness. "Kael," she snarled, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Put an end to this madness. You're destroying our pack." He cackled, a shrill, grating sound that set her teeth on edge. "Your pack? Oh, Lyra, still clinging to that delusion? This isn't about packs or territories. This is about dismantling Thorne. And you, my dear, are his chink in the armor." His words hit like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She recognized the truth in his gaze, the depraved logic underpinning his actions. He wasn't just aiming to win. He was attempting to dismantle Thorne from within, weaponizing her. "He feels nothing for me," Lyra countered, the words tinged with a pain she failed to entirely conceal. "He severed our connection. He made his choice." Kael's cruel smirk widened. Did he now, or did he simply try to deceive himself? Magic leaves its mark, Lyra, and some bonds, no matter how brutally severed, leave echoes that resonate within the very core of one's being. I know he senses you. I see it flickering in his eyes, that spark of something. And that something is precisely what I need." He gestured, and the rogues advanced, their snarls escalating in ferocity. Lyra stood firm, claws extended, prepared to fight, but a glacial dread seeped into her bones. She was outgunned, overwhelmed, and trapped in Kael's twisted game, where her life was merely a pawn. "What is it you want?" she demanded, striving to keep her voice steady. "So simple, really," Kael purred, the false sweetness of his tone grating on her. "I want Thorne to witness the unraveling of everything he holds dear, beginning with you." He raised his hand once more, and a surge of dark energy washed over the rogues, intensifying their frenzy. They hurtled forward, a snarling, clawing mass, and Lyra knew she couldn't fend them off for long. But then, a figure blurred past her, a flash of silver tearing through the chaos. Thorne. He moved with a speed and savagery she had never witnessed, carving through the rogues with a relentless efficiency that left them broken and bleeding. He planted himself before her, eyes blazing with a frigid, controlled wrath, his entire being radiating a potent aura of raw power. "Get behind me," he commanded, his voice flat and devoid of all warmth. Lyra hesitated. She didn't crave his protection, not if it stemmed from duty or guilt. She yearned for him to desire to protect her, to experience the connection that still pulsed within her, despite his efforts to extinguish it. "Thorne, don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He wants you to react. He wants you broken." He ignored her, his gaze locked onto Kael. "Release her," he said, his voice a low, menacing rumble. Kael chuckled. "Or what, Thorne? Will you finally exhibit some emotion? Will you finally concede that she holds significance for you? I highly doubt it. You're too terrified of vulnerability, too afraid of what might come. You'd sooner embrace oblivion than confront your own heart." Thorne's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, his self-restraint unwavering. Lyra could feel the tension emanating from him, the internal struggle raging within. He was poised precariously close to the edge, and Kael was relentlessly pushing him further towards the abyss. "Very well," Kael said, his smile widening. "Have it your way. But don't assume I won't exploit her. She's a valuable player in this game, Thorne. A very valuable player indeed." He raised his hand, and a tendril of dark energy snaked out, ensnaring Lyra's ankle. She gasped, a searing pain shooting through her veins. The energy felt icy and invasive, like a parasitic entity consuming her very essence. "Thorne!" she cried out, her voice laced with pain and fear. He flinched, his composure finally fracturing. The violet light in his eyes intensified, and a guttural growl reverberated in his chest. He took a step toward Kael, claws extended, poised to strike. "That's it, Thorne," Kael purred. "Surrender to the darkness. Embrace the power. Become the monster you were always meant to be." Lyra struggled against the tendril, but it held fast, its grip tightening relentlessly. She could feel her strength ebbing away, her vision blurring at the edges. She knew that if Thorne succumbed to his rage, if he allowed the darkness to consume him, it would signify the end of him, the devastation of the pack, the annihilation of everything. "Thorne, no," she pleaded, her voice weak and desperate. "Don't let him win. Fight it. Combat the darkness." But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Thorne's gaze was fixed on Kael, his face twisted with fury, his body trembling with barely suppressed power. He stood on the precipice, ready to plunge into the depths, and Lyra realized she was the only one who could pull him back. But she was trapped, weakened, and quickly running out of time. Unleashed power. A static charge prickled the air, heavier than any pre-battle tension. This was malevolence, pure and thick. Kael's grip on Lyra's arm became visa-like, his smile a twisted mockery of warmth. "See, Thorne? This is the consequence of denial, of burying truth alive." The edge of a silver blade kissed her throat, its surface reflecting the sickly light emanating from the encroaching shadows. Lyra's breath caught, but she refused Kael the satisfaction of fear. Her gaze locked on Thorne, silently begging him not to yield, not to let this cruel charade shatter him completely. Thorne remained immobile, a statue hewn from granite and despair. His jaw clenched, a visible struggle against the storm raging within. Every fiber of his being screamed for action, to rip Kael apart, to eradicate the danger to Lyra. Yet, the dark sorcery he'd embraced, the power intended to sever their bond, held him captive. It whispered insidious temptations, dominion, a life untouched by the messy complications of emotion. He'd believed he could control it, wield it as a shield. Now, it felt more like a gilded cage. "Just confess it, Thorne," Kael hissed, his voice a venomous caress. "Admit her significance. Admit the bond you so desperately try to annihilate." The silence stretched, a taut wire about to snap. Lyra felt the blade's frigid kiss. In Thorne's eyes, she glimpsed a flicker of the man she knew, the one buried beneath layers of anguish and self-imposed isolation. Then, that light vanished, replaced by an unnerving void. "She is insignificant," Thorne declared, his voice a monotone. Lyra's heart fractured, not from the words themselves, but from the emptiness resonating behind them. He was lying, to himself, most of all. And the lie, she realized with a sickening certainty, was destroying him. Kael's laughter, a shrill, grating sound, echoed through the clearing. "Such commitment to pretense. But I suspect she might disagree." He applied more pressure. A fragile line of crimson welled on Lyra's neck. Something within Thorne shattered. The dark magic that had held him rigid, that had tempted him with control, seemed to recoil, faltering. His will, his true essence, surged to the fore, rejecting the insidious influence. The denial, the fabricated facade, the meticulously constructed wall around his heart, all collapsed into dust. A raw guttural roar tore from his throat, a sound that reverberated through the woods, shaking the very earth. It wasn't the measured dominance of an alpha. It was primal, untamed, born of pure, unadulterated fury and desperate affection. The transformation was instantaneous, brutal. Bones snapped and realigned. Muscles swelled, tearing his clothes to shreds. His human form contorted, fur erupting across his skin in a swirling, tenebrous tide. His eyes, once glacial, now burned with an incandescent gold. This was more than just the alpha shift, it was an unleashing. The latent power he had so fiercely suppressed had finally broken free. The air shimmered with palpable heat. Trees convulsed, battered by the sheer force of his metamorphosis. Even Kael, moments before so arrogant, stumbled backward, a spark of genuine terror flickering in his widened eyes. Lyra felt a surge no fear, not despair, but hope, unadulterated and bright. The Thorne she knew, the Thorne she cherished, still existed, and he was fighting. He stood, a titan wreathed in fur and muscle, embodying predatory might. His teeth were bared in a snarl that promised nothing but pain and obliteration. The darkness that had clung to him, the sorcery he had embraced, now seemed to cower in his presence. He was no longer its puppet, but a force of nature, a storm unleashed. His gaze locked on Kael. Not just anger blazed in his eyes, but a fierce, unwavering possessiveness, the primal imperative to protect what was his. Lyra, his pack, his responsibility. Wordlessly, he launched himself forward. He moved with impossible speed, a blur of fur and fury. The earth trembled beneath his paws as he closed the gap in a heartbeat. Kael barely managed a scream before Thorne descended upon him. The silver blade clattered to the earth, forgotten debris. Thorne's massive paw slammed into Kael's chest, sending him hurtling backward. He collided with a tree with a sickening crunch, the impact stealing his breath. Thorne didn't relent, a relentless onslaught of claw and fang. He roared again, a deafening blast that seemed to fracture the silence of the forest. Lyra watched, captivated, as Thorne tore into Kael with unprecedented ferocity. It wasn't merely a fight, it was a declaration, a war against the shadows that threatened to consume him, against the fear that drove him to sever their bond, against anyone who dared endanger those he loved. She knew, with unwavering certainty, that this was merely the dawn. The unleashed power, the raw, untamed force now coursing through Thorne, was a weapon, yet it was also a peril. He had broken free from the dark magic's grasp, but the taint remained. If he wasn't vigilant, if he couldn't master the energy he had unleashed, it could engulf him utterly. The immediate threat, Kael, was momentarily subdued, groaning at the base of the tree. But the greater menace, the force that had corrupted Thorne, still loomed. Lyra knew she was the only one who could guide him through the perilous path ahead. Even if he resisted, even if he tried to push her away, she would remain. She had to. The pack, Thorne, everything depended on it. The Alpha's duel. The ground vibrated with each cataclysmic impact. Thorne, a silver storm of teeth and claw, clashed with Kael's sinister assault. Their growls ripped through the canopy, a discordant chorus of fury and desperation. The Alpha's usual stoicism had vanished, replaced by a wild intensity, fueled by a power he struggled to control, a force Lyra feared would ultimately shatter him. Kael, smaller but no less lethal, fought with chilling precision, his attacks targeted, each meant to disable. He circled Thorne's brute force, evading the larger wolf's enraged swipes with cunning footwork. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic tattoo. She sensed the fractured link between them, an echo of shared experience that throbbed with his anguish. A fragile thread across an abyss, yet enough to guide him.
Thorne!
she cried, her voice raw. "He's goading you. He wants you depleted," Thorne bellowed, disregarding her warning as he launched himself forward, claws extended. Kael sidestepped, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Still listening to the little seer, Thorne? Even after you discarded her?" The bob struck home. Thorne hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his features, and Kael exploited it, slamming into Thorne's side. The Alpha reeled, colliding with a massive oak. The ancient tree shuddered. Lyra's jaw tightened. He was allowing Kael to manipulate him, permitting his anger to blind his judgment. She needed to penetrate the haze of fury and shadow. Closing her eyes, she centered on that faint echo of their bond, reaching out with her mind, not through words, but with pure feeling. "Focus, Thorne. He's preying on your insecurities, your terror of losing yourself." Understanding dawned in Thorne's eyes. He straightened, his breathing ragged but steadier. No longer attacking blindly, he scrutinized Kael's movements, his gaze sharpening. Sensing the subtle shift in Thorne's stance, Kael renewed his assault, raking Thorne's chest with bloody furrows. "You can't win, Thorne," Kael hissed, his voice laced with poison. "This power, it's too much. It will devour you, just as it consumed your sire." Thorne winced, reopening an old wound. The memory of his father, lost to the very darkness that now threatened to engulf him, was a potent weapon in Kael's arsenal. Lyra felt his torment, a searing spike that threatened to drown her. "Don't yield, Thorne. Remember who you are. You are the Alpha. You are stronger than this." Her mental plea resonated within him, a lighthouse piercing the encroaching night. Thorne roared, a sound of defiance that reverberated through the forest. He channeled his pain, his fear, his rage, not into reckless aggression, but into a concentrated, burning energy. The silver fur around his eyes deepened, swirling with an inner luminescence. He moved with a speed and grace previously unseen, his attacks now precise, each strike calculated to inflict maximum damage. Kael, taken by surprise by Thorne's sudden metamorphosis, scrambled to defend himself. Thorne's claws sliced through his guard, rending flesh and muscle. Kael stumbled backward, blood erupting from his injuries. What is this?" He choked, his eyes wide with terror. "This," Thorne rumbled, his voice a guttural threat, "is the power you craved to steal, the power you sought to defile. And it will be your ruin." He pounced, pinning Kael to the earth. Kael writhed desperately, his claws scrabbling at Thorne's pelt, but Thorne held him firm, his grip unbreakable. Lyra watched, holding her breath. She knew what Thorne must do, yet she also recognized the potential cost. Unrestrained use of his power would leave him exposed, vulnerable to the darkness that continued to lurk within. "Thorne, tread carefully. Do not let it claim you," she begged, her mental voice trembling. Thorne closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He delved deep within himself, past the anger, past the fear, to the heart of his being, to the resolute fidelity he felt for his pack. He envisioned Ilara, Bram, every wolf dependent on him. He thought of Lyra, the woman whose fortitude and empathy had challenged and transformed him, even after his attempts to drive her away. He opened his eyes, his gaze clear and steely. He raised his paw, claws bared, and brought it down with a swift, resolute motion. The forest stilled. The soul sounds were Thorne's ragged breaths and the delicate whisper of leaves. Kael lay motionless beneath him, his eyes vacant, his body lifeless. The threat had passed. Thorne slowly regained his footing. his body trembling with depletion. The silver shadow around his eyes lightened, reverting to its normal shade. The darkness that had swirled within seemed to ebb, leaving him depleted but intact. He looked towards Lyra, his expression inscrutable. Lyra hurried to his side, reaching out to touch his arm. She faltered, recalling the ache of his rejection, the sharp pain of their severed connection. But the concern in her heart eclipsed her apprehension. "Thorne, are you all right?" He flinched at her touch, retreating slightly. His eyes were distant, guarded. I don't know," he said, his voice raspy. "I feel hollow." Lyra frowned. The darkness might have retreated, but the injury lingered. He had secured the battle, but the war was far from finished. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "Together." Thorne looked at her, a spark of something hope flickering in his eyes. But it was promptly masked by a familiar expression of indifference. He turned away, his gaze fixed upon the horizon. "Don't raise your hopes, Lyra," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Some ties are best left severed." Lyra watched him depart, her heart weighted down. The Alpha had triumphed in his struggle, but he was still battling a war within himself, a conflict against his own fears and vulnerabilities. And she knew, with an unwavering conviction that settled deep within her, that she would stand beside him, whether he welcomed her presence or not. The pack needed him, and despite all that had transpired, she still sensed the tug of their bond, a connection that even broken vows and dark magic could not fully extinguish. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril and uncertainty, but she was prepared. She must be. For Thorne, for the pack, for the destiny of their world. A bond reforged dust devils danced across the ravaged field, a somber gray veil settling on the aftermath. The sharp tang of ozone mingled with the metallic reek of blood, a brutal reminder of the conflict's ferocity. Lyra's pulse hammered a frantic rhythm as she navigated the jubilant throng, her focus laser-locked on the still figure at the epicenter. Thorne. He was propped against a shot of rock, the unnatural shadows that had plagued him banished, leaving him looking utterly drained. A wave of dread seized her. She elbowed past celebrating warriors, their cheers fading into a muted background drone. "Thorne!" Her voice, tight with panic, cracked. She dropped to her knees, hands hovering, hesitant to intrude, afraid of what she might find. His eyelids flickered, revealing the emerald depths she cherished, now dimmed by pain and weariness. He found her face, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Lyra." His voice, a mere rasp. Relief surged through her, dizzying in its intensity. He lived, but the sight of his wounds, the angry, crisscrossing slashes marring his chest and arms, sparked fresh alarm. The dark power had demanded its due. "Hush," she urged, her voice barely a whisper. "Just let me." Without waiting for assent, she focused, palms hovering over the injuries, drawing on the warmth within her, the life force linking her to the earth, the pack to him. A golden luminescence spilled from her hands, bathing his ravaged form in its restorative glow. He winced softly as the energy weaved its magic, coaxing torn tissues back together, repairing ruptured muscle. She sensed the lingering darkness, a persistent stain resisting her efforts. But she persisted, driven by her love, her conviction in the man he truly was. Minutes stretched into an age. The pack had stilled, their revelry subdued as they watched Lyra, their faces etched with worry. At last, the golden light ebbed, revealing smooth, unblemished skin. The gashes were gone, replaced by faint, silvered lines that would fade with time. Lyra sagged back, her own reserves depleted. A film of sweat coated her brow, and her hands trembled. But she had succeeded. He was whole. Thorne reached for her, his hand finding hers. His grip weakened, but resolute. "Thank you," he breathed, his voice gaining strength. "You saved me." She met his gaze, her heart aching at the raw vulnerability laid bare. The darkness had retreated, leaving in its wake a profound regret. "Always," she whispered, "always. Thorne." He squeezed her hand, his eyes searching hers. I was wrong, Lyra. Utterly wrong. Fear consumed me. Fear of failing you, the pack, of succumbing to the power's pull. I pushed you away, thinking I was shielding you, but only inflicted pain. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring her vision. "I know," she murmured, her voice thick. "But it's in the past. You're back." He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "No, the past is never truly gone. I must earn your absolution, rebuild your trust, prove myself worthy of your love." She reached up, framing his face with her hands. "You possess it already, Thorne. Always have. But you speak truthfully. We have much to mend, together." A genuine smile broke through, dispelling the shadows that had haunted him. "Together," he echoed, his voice imbued with burgeoning hope. He drew her close, embracing her gently. She nestled into him, burying her face against his neck, inhaling his familiar scent. He was warm, solid, real. He was sanctuary. A joyous roar erupted from the pack. They had witnessed the battle, the descent, the separation. Now they witnessed the homecoming, the healing, the reforging of the bond that united them. Beta Bram stepped forward, his face alight. "Alpha," he announced, his voice resonating through the clearing. "The pack is secure. Kael is vanquished, and you are returned to us." Thorne rose, pulling Lyra with him. He stood tall, shoulders squared, his eyes gleaming with renewed strength and resolve. He surveyed his pack, his family, and a wave of affection washed over him. "We prevailed," he declared, his voice clear and resonant. "We confronted the darkness and emerged triumphant, but not individually. We prevailed as one." He turned to Lyra, his gaze brimming with adoration. "I am indebted to you beyond measure, Lyra. You are my strength, my compass, my heart. I vow never again will I allow fear to control me. I will trust you, cherish you, love you, always." He bent and kissed her, a profound, impassioned kiss that sealed their covenant, a promise of a future filled with love, trust, and unwavering devotion. The pack thundered its approval, their cheers reverberating through the trees. Their Alpha had returned. Their Luna stood by his side, and unified, they would confront whatever trials awaited. Later, under the moon-silvered gaze, the pack coalesced around a crackling bonfire. The aroma of roasting game mingled with the sounds of laughter and song. The victory was celebrated, the fallen mourned, and the future embraced with anticipation. Thorne sat beside Lyra, his arm encircling her. He observed his pack, his family, reveling in the moment's joy. He had stumbled, made grievous errors. He had permitted fear to obscure his judgment, driving him to the precipice. But he had learned from his failings. He had rediscovered the light. And he knew, with unwavering faith, that with Lyra as his anchor, he could overcome any obstacle. He leaned close and whispered, "I love you, Lyra, beyond words." She smiled, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "I love you too, Thorne, always and for all time." He kissed her again, a tender, gentle kiss that spoke of a love tested and refined, a love that had emerged stronger and more enduring than before. The bond had been fractured, yet it had been reforged in the crucible of adversity, tempered by love and loyalty. And now it was unbreakable,